Good evening. Can we start? Can you hear me?
You're somebody.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, we hear you now. Is Dennis here with us? Hi, everybody. Ita, would you like to find out what's with Dennis?
Dennis is on.
Dennis is on. Great. Okay.
Can we start the video?
Okay. Great.
Okay, so hello everybody and good afternoon to the participants here in Israel, and good morning to our friends who are joining us from the United States and other places in the global world. As in the last 7 years, we are gathering today on the eve of the Israel's Independence Day to present the findings of the annual JPPI Pluralism Index. The annual JPPI's Pluralism Index was initiated by the William Davidson Foundation, complied by the JPPI's fellows Shmuel Rosner and Noach Slapkov, and is based on a wide-ranging survey in cooperation with the pollster Professor Camil Fuchs. As noted in the invitation to this meeting, the index focuses on identifying areas of consensus and controversy, offers new insights regarding major trends in Israeli society. As we all know very well, in the past year, there have been dramatic events that have had an impact on the Israeli public. First, a new and very complex government has been formed, which is still struggling for its existence. In addition, almost a year ago, we experienced dramatic security incidents in several mixed cities in Israel. In the last month, there were also some severe terrorist attacks and so on. All these events are present to one degree or another in the positions of the Israeli sectors. To present the opening remarks to this meeting, I am pleased to invite Professor Yedidia Stern, the JPPI president. Yedidia, please. You're on mute.
Here we go. Shalom, everyone. Thank you, Noah. Welcome to our annual presentation of the Pluralism Index. A country's national resilience, a result of many mutually related elements. It comprises matters of economic resilience, such as standard of living, matters of social resilience, inequality, availability, and quality of education, and other issues. It involves also matters of political resilience, such as political participation, trust in institutions, etc. And of course, matters of national security and military power. However, on top of that, a very important additional element of national resilience, which is very critical in Israel, is the cohesiveness component of society. Meaning cohesiveness in Israeli society, and also between Jews in Israel and Jews outside of Israel, is crucial for our survival. However, this is a real challenge since we are in the midst of a cultural war between the main identity groups in Israel. Each one of these groups has different views, contradicting each other regarding the desired character of the state of Israel. Generally speaking, and excuse me for simplifying it, seculars in Israel consider Israel to be a nation state. The Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, want it to be a religious state. The religious want it to be a combination of a national religious state. And Israeli Arabs would like Israel to be a neutral state. Now, this basic dispute, I believe, is the source of the Israeli unrest. It is a background of the political dead end, and it tears our society apart. Now, this dispute is not going to be resolved in the foreseeable future. None of these identity groups is going to disappear or to give up its vision. Therefore, we must learn how to function together despite the chronic this agreement. The challenge is even bigger since we do not have a full constitution like almost all other liberal democracies. Constitutions set the rules of the democratic game. They give assurances to minorities against abuse of power by the majority. They secure the separation of powers between politics and the judiciary and so on. But here in Israel, we do not have stable rules by which we conduct our cultural war. That's why pluralism is so important in Israel. To put it very simply, pluralism allows different types of people who have different beliefs and opinions to coexist peacefully and respectfully within the same society. Because of the significance of pluralism to Israeli society, we at JPPI measure it year after year for the last 7 years. So I want to thank the William Davidson Foundation that supports this important project for the last 7 years, and to Shlomo Rosner, to Noah Slepkov, and to Professor Camil Fuchs, who conduct the research in a very skillful way. Back to you, Noah.
Unmute, Noah.
Thank you, Shmuel. To present the index findings, I would like to invite JPPI Senior Fellow, Mr. Shmuel Rosner. Please, Shmuel.
Thank you, it's a pleasure. I hope, Noah, just nod if you see the presentation. Okay, Noah will be my person of reference if there's a problem. Thank you, Noah and Yedidia, for the introduction. It's been 7 years since we launched the Pluralism Index, and it evolved along these years. And I think the product we present today is no less interesting than what we had in previous years. It is based on a fairly large survey of Jewish Israelis, more than 1,000 Jewish Israelis. That's a fairly large sample, and a much smaller sample of 200 Arab Israelis. You can see the numbers here, the margin of error, etc.
You're on the first slide still.
I'm still on the first slide.
There
okay.
you go. Now you're.
Oh, okay. I saw the second one. Okay. That's the second?
Yeah.
Okay. Professor Camil Fuchs of Tel Aviv University analyzed the data, and we think that the results pretty much represent what Israelis think today. I'll begin with I'll run through the data. There's a lot of data that we can present. I have many slides, so I won't have time to elaborate on each of these slides, but I'll try to be at least clear in what I say, and if there are questions later, we can address the questions. So
all the slides are on the website too, on JPI's website.
Yeah. A question that repeats every year, and you can see here the results of last year and this year. We ask people if they feel comfortable being themselves in Israel. We ask this question both of Jews and non-Jews. The changes we see from year to year are not greatly significant. This year is slightly different in the sense that we see a decrease in the number of people who feel very comfortable, and a somewhat increase in the people who feel comfortable. The changes aren't dramatic. We don't think there is much reason to be concerned about the sense of comfortability that people feel when they live here. This is the sum from the sample of Jewish Israelis divided by 4 groups: secular, traditional, namely Masorti, religious, and Haredi. As you can see here, the people who feel least comfortable, or The group from which fewer people feel very comfortable is the group of Haredi Israelis. This goes hand in hand with the fact that in the last year, Haredis were out of power. The representatives aren't members of the coalition and the government. There are certain debates that they lost in the past year because of that. And also there are issues with the image of Haredis in Israel that we will see later. Maybe that's the reason for which Haredis don't feel as comfortable or as very comfortable as other groups in Israel today. This slide is very significant. It's the slide of self-identification of non-Jews, of Arabs in Israel. And what you see here are the two main colors, the brownish part and the bluish part, represent two main options. One does not include the word Israeli, and the other one does. People can self-define as Arab or as Palestinian, which does not include the word Israel, and then they can also self-define as Israeli, Arab Israeli, and this year we also added Palestinian Israeli. By and large, except for 2020, that was an outlier in our findings, what we see is about 50% of Arab Israelis who self-define as something that has Israel in it, while the other half prefer determination or a definition that does not include Israel. Mostly Arab, very few identify solely as Palestinians. This is significant. In an earlier session, we had an expert to Israel's Arab Society, and he said that even Israeli Arabs who self-define as Arabs rather than Palestinians demonstrate a level of desire for integration that is higher than those who say just Palestinians. So we see that at least half of Israeli Arabs today do not hesitate to use the word Israeli in the way they self-define. As we did in previous years, we asked two questions about the sense of future and connection. We asked people whether they feel that they share a future with all Israelis, Jews, and Arabs. We also asked people whether they feel special connection to all Israelis, Jews, and Arabs. Shared future is a matter of practicality. We all live here, so of course we have a shared future, or at least we are supposed to understand that we have a shared future. Feeling special connection is somewhat more complicated. This is more about an emotional component of what we feel. So let's begin with the shared future. As you can see here, you can see the responses of both Jews and Arabs, and it's clear that Arabs have a stronger tendency to understand or to express their belief that Jews and Arabs in Israel have a shared future. More of them somewhat agree or agree that there is a shared future for Jews and Arabs in Israel. Still, most Jews agree with the notion that there is a shared future, but we do see that a significant number of close to 40% of Jewish Israelis disagree with the notion that Jews and Arabs have a shared future in Israel. This is a comparison between last year and this year concerning shared future. As you can see, there are some differences between last year and this year, the most significant of which is a decrease of those who say somewhat agree and an increase of those who say totally agree, which means that within the group that basically agrees that there is a shared future, more people tend to strongly agree with it, and less people tend to be just somewhat agree with it. So there is a more robust agreement that there is a shared future among those who believe in shared future. The number of those who do not believe in a shared future did not change much from last year. This is, again, same question, shared future for all Israelis, Jews and non-Jews, this time divided by politics. And what we see here fairly clearly is that the last year in which we see a center-left coalition of Jews and Arabs increased the number of people on the left who agreed that there is a shared future, while on the right side of the political map among Jews, the number of people who believe, or the share of people who believe in a shared future, decreased from 50% to 28%. That's a dramatic decrease in the share of right-wing Jewish Israelis who believe in a shared future. These Israelis see a coalition of Jews and Arabs, a coalition with which they disagree, and hence we see the decrease in support of such notion among right-wing Jewish Israelis. Now we are turning to shared future, but not among all. I'm sorry. Now we turn not to the shared future. We combine the shared future with the special connection. As I said, special connection is more of an emotional thing. Shared future is more of a practical thing. And in line with that, what we see is that more Jewish Israelis agree that there is a shared future than those who feel special connection. Connection is a matter of a sentiment, of a positive sentiment. For Jews to feel positive sentiment towards Arabs in Israel is complicated because of the difficult relationships that Jews and Arabs have for many years, and hence we see stronger support for the statement that there is a shared future and a weaker support for the statement that there is a special connection among all Israelis. Now we move to a question not about all Israelis, but rather about all Jews. This is more about Israel-diaspora relations than about relations within Israeli society. This is a question we only asked of Jews. And again, we asked them, do Israeli Jews share a future with all Jews, including those who do not live in Israel? And do they feel special connection to all Jews, including those who do not live within Israel? This time we see a reverse result. This time the shared future is the weaker notion, because obviously, to feel that Israelis in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem necessarily share a future with Jews in Sydney, Australia, or in Chicago, the United States, that's a more complicated notion. But to feel an emotional connection to all Jews, that's less complicated, and hence we see a stronger emotional connection, a somewhat weaker belief in a shared future, even concerning shared future, we do see that there is a clear majority of Jews in Israel who do say that they see a future shared with all Jews around the world. More than 60% of Jews in Israel have such belief. This is about the politics of connection to other Jews. Those who feel connection to all Jews tend to be much more on the right side of the political map than on the left side of the political map. In fact, I would argue that we have a challenge among center-left and left-wing Israelis. Those Israelis might be more in agreement with other Jews concerning certain policy recipes. They might agree with them more on a third platform near the Western Wall, or maybe concerning the two-state solution. But when we talk about emotional connection to all Jews, we see it much more on the right, dramatically more on the right. 80% on the right feel such emotional connection, special connection, while on the left, we see that 50% of all Jews disagree that the Jews have, that they have special connection to all Jews, including those who do not live in Israel. Now to a question that we repeat every year. The graph is slightly complicated, but I'll try to explain it quickly. Basically, what we do every year, we ask people to rank different groups on the level of their contribution to the success of Israel. We give them a variety of options. So we asked about soldiers every year, and soldiers come on top every year. The number one position is always occupied by soldiers among Jews. So Jews in Israel think that the most positively contributive group in Israel is the group of soldiers. Then we have Israeli seculars. We added this year academics, professors in universities. We asked whether they positively contribute to the well-being or to the success of Israel. And I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that Israelis do see professors as somewhat positively contributing to the well-being of Israel. Every year among Jews, the two least contributing groups are the groups of Arabs and Haredis. You can see them marked in red and black, and they move from the bottom on the left side, high contribution, and go up on the right side where the contribution is low. So among Jews, the belief is, and again, this is not a fact. It's not as if I'm saying Arabs contribute less. It's about image. The image among Jews is that Arabs contribute less to the success of Israel, and that ultra-Orthodox Haredi Israelis contribute less to the well-being of Israel. When we turn with the same question to Arab Israelis, we get, of course, somewhat different results concerning Arabs. So Arab Israelis tend to think that Arab Israelis do have a somewhat positive contribution to the success of Israel. The most interesting fact here is the state of ultra-Orthodox Israelis. Both Jews and Arabs see Haredi Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews, as the group least contributing to the success of Israel. Again, I'm not saying this is the factual situation. I'm just showing you that there is a rare agreement between Jews and Arabs when they look at different groups in Israel and ask themselves which group is the most and the least positively contributing to the well-being of Israel. Haredis come at the very bottom. A list of questions that we asked this year was about shared spaces in the public sphere. We asked about many things. You can see a list of some of these things here. The first questions were about Jews and Arabs. Should Jews and Arabs share space or have separate spaces in a list of places such as hospital rooms, swimming pools, medical clinics, cemeteries, beaches, and neighborhoods? Should they share neighborhoods in which both Jews and Arabs can live? As you can see here, there are differences between Jews and Arabs on some instances. Generally speaking, Arabs tend to be more positive towards shared spaces than Jews. We were, again, it is encouraging to see that both Jews and Arabs understand that we all share spaces in hospitals and medical clinics and beaches. But when it comes to neighborhoods, for example, as you can see here, the share of Arabs who wants to have shared neighborhoods compared to the share of Jews who wants to have shared neighborhoods, there is a huge gap between the two. You can see it here. This is the urban neighborhoods. Should they be shared or separate? As you can see, 2/3 of Jews would like them to be separate. Almost 2/3 of Arabs would like them to be mixed. So here we have different feelings and different ambitions for Jews and Arabs when it comes to mixing or separating their lives. What you can also see here is that when it comes to Jews, those Jews who agree to separate or those Jews who demand to separate neighborhoods are mostly on the right. Those Jews who agree to mix neighborhoods are mostly on the left. This doesn't necessarily mean that when or if there is a practical such action or a practical such movement of Arabs into neighborhoods that are majority Jewish, they will be positively accepted by everyone on the left or within the center. But we do see a different sentiment, a clearly different sentiment between left and right, where the left would like to see more mixed type of lives and the right more separation. This is true not just for Jews and Arabs, but also for Jews and Jews. When we look at different religious groups or groups by religiosity, we see that separation is more a thing of the right wing and hence more religious groups in Israel, and mixing places is more a thing of the secular and hence center-left groups in Israel. Here you see a question about shared public beaches. And as you can see, a clear majority of seculars would share beaches with both Arabs and religious Israelis, while religious and Haredi Israelis, only a small majority of them would share beaches with Arab Israelis, and a minority would like to share their beaches with secular Israelis. They would like these places to be separate because of issues of modesty and separation of sexes, etc. This is a question about units in the IDF. It's a complicated question. I'm not sure it's a good idea to go deeply into it, but there is a sense, especially among religious Israelis, and we see about half of them here, the 33% plus 14% of religious Israelis who would like to see brigades in the IDF separated for secular and religious soldiers. This is my assumption, and also Professor Fuchs's assumption, is that this is because of the issue of female soldiers serving in these units. Religious Israelis assume that in mixed units there will be not just male but also female soldiers, and hence some of them want separation, while a vast majority of secular Israelis don't see a reason to separate units or brigades in the IDF and would like to see a mixing of all units. This goes back to the question of image and popularity among Israelis. We ask people on the theoretical question of a future coalition, not whether they support the current coalition, but if they are tasked with building a coalition, which group they would like to be represented in their coalition. As you can see here, among Jews, almost all of them would like to see seculars represented in the coalition. A clear, vast majority of them would like to see religious Israelis represented in their coalition. However, only half of Jewish Israelis would like to have the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, represented in the coalition, and a similar number would like to see Arabs represented in the coalition. So about half of all Jews in Israel would like to see a political coalition that does not include Haredis and or does not include Arabs. Of course, those who do not want Arabs and those who do not want Haredis aren't the same people. Among seculars, a clear majority of almost 75% would like to include Arabs, but only a third would like to include Haredis. Among religious Israelis, you see the reverse situation. Almost 80% would like to see Haredis represented, but a minority of about a fifth would like to see Arabs represented in the coalition. We asked Jews whether most or how many of the Arab Israelis are quote unquote extremists. We did not define extremism for them. We just asked this question, letting them interpret for themselves the meaning of extremism. As you can see here, there is an increase in the number of Jews who say that very few Arabs are extremists compared to 4 years ago, and that's an encouraging improvement in the situation. This is somewhat complicated. These are numbers that we just completed gathering late last week. Since we gathered most of the data in early March, we decided to re-sample almost 500 respondents with the same question about extremism to see whether the events of the last 5-6 weeks changed the minds of Jewish Israelis about the extremism of Arabs. You might remember that there were a few notable cases of Arab Israelis participating in terror attacks on Jews, and also the whole issue of Temple Mount and the tension around it. So we went back to almost 500 of the same people who answered the survey. And what we see is a slight increase in the number of people. There is also a decrease with 7%, but all in all, there is a slight increase in the proportion of Jews who think that more Arabs are extremists and fewer Jews who believe that Arabs are less extremist than 5-6 weeks ago. We asked Arabs the same question: how many of Israel's Jews are extremists? As you can see here, there is a dramatic change for the worse in the share of Arabs who think that very few Jewish Israelis are extremists, from about a quarter, 23%, 4 years ago, to 8% this year, who think that only very few Jewish Israelis are extremists. This is not a positive change, but it is what it is, and we have to keep monitoring it, because the ebbs and flows of Jewish-Arabs relations in Israel are very rocky in the last couple of years. An important question about violence within the Arab sector. Those who live in Israel know that one of the most discussed issues in Israel in the last year or two is violence in the Arab sector, crime and violence in the Arab sector. And we asked the question about the reason. Why is there such dramatic increase in violence among Arabs? Why do we see such high number of incidents in the Arab street? And we gave 4 options for answer. It's the result of government neglect. It's a result of police neglect. It's a result of Arabs not letting the police do its job, or just this is Arab culture and we shouldn't expect better. As you can see here, there is a dramatic difference or a dramatic gap between the answers of Arabs and Jews on this question. A vast majority of Arabs, almost 80% of them, basically blame Israel's institution for the current situation. They blame either the government or the police for the current situation. However, among Jews, we see more than half who blame Arabs themselves for the situation, either the inability of the Arab public to cooperate with the police, or the fact that Arabs have a culture that somehow promotes or allows for higher rates of violence. So Arabs blame the Israeli government, Jews blame Arabs. That's a dramatic difference that we should pay attention to. That's it for me for now. Thank you all for your patience, and back to you, Noah.
Thank you, Shmuel, for your fascinating presentation and your very interesting findings. I would like now to invite JPPI co-chair Ambassador Dennis Ross to share with us his thoughts and insights on these findings. Please, Dennis. You're on mute.
You hear me now?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. First, let me thank Shmuel and Noah. Once again, this is quite a remarkable set of insights that are generated. And it's on such a critical issue. I think Yedidia put it very well in his introduction. There is a different definition among different Israelis about what the nature of the state is. And coming to understand that, obviously, and the sources of it, is critical for trying to come up with approaches that can minimize what are some of the sources of separation and friction and the like. So that's kind of observation number 1. Observation number 2 is I find the numbers fascinating in many respects. I mean, some are not surprising, some are a little bit. One that stood out for me was the slide on contributions of Arabs. I would have, and I guess I'll pose this as a question as much as a comment. I would have expected to see some change in the perception of Arab contributions to Israel after the pandemic, after COVID. So many of the frontline workers are Arab. There were many stories about Israeli Arab doctors, Arab nurses, those who were in the emergency services, those who were in ambulances, those who were exposed. I'm just curious as to, I didn't see much indication of that in this. I'm curious if there was any kind of manifestation of recognition of that. Now, that's one thing I said that sort of stood out as a question mark for me. Something else, I think it's sort of embedded in the polling data, but also I think in Shmuel's discussion, he touches on it a little bit. We're looking at something that represents obviously divisions within Israel. So when I say sources of polarization create a prism through which the world is seen, that shouldn't come across as surprising. But I wonder, and as I said, Shmuel, you touched on it a little bit, I wonder how much the political polarization affects the perceptions. And what I mean by that specifically is the right wing in Israel that is not part of the government, that is in opposition to the government, sees this government and has demonized this government. And the Arabs there is an Arab party that is a part of this government. Now, there was one slide that showed the change over the course of a year. But I wonder if you had in the poll, if you focused among right-wingers who support the government versus right-wingers who oppose this governing coalition, I wonder what their attitude is towards the Arabs in terms of, again, how they perceive them, their perception of the percent of those that they would still say are extreme versus those that are not. That is shown. I mean, the general point is shown in the polling, that highly suspicious and a tendency to see Arabs as being more extreme, at least in the right wing. I wonder, as I said, if you were to divide the right wing between those who support this government and those who oppose it, how much that would actually show up in the findings and color what one sees. This issue of political polarization, I think, obviously probably affects almost every question. Those more general Israelis who would support this government versus those who don't support this government, again, precisely because this is a government that has an Arab party in it for the first time. I wonder how much this factor is reflected in terms of what we see. By the same token, I think this probably also applies to the Israeli Arabs as well. There's obviously division among the Israeli Arabs between those that support this government and those that do not. Obviously, there's a real competition between the joint list and with Ram. And I wonder how Arab attitudes are influenced by how they perceive this government and how much of a factor that seems to have in the assessments they make. I mean, those are just some quick reactions to what is an extremely interesting set of results again, and also the importance of doing this over time so that you can see if there are patterns and you can see if there are changes. You can begin to isolate what may account for the changes. And I'm obviously highlighting one potential factor. But I think maybe the biggest takeaway I have from this is still, what are the divisions within Israel? How much are the perceptions of different groups shaped by what have been a set of attitudes that have been formed over years and by generally a lack of exposure, or at least the right kind of exposure? I'm reminded of how important it is that the JPPI is focused also in one of its projects, not only on developing a kind of understanding of basic civic responsibilities and civic attitudes vis-a-vis society as a whole, but also the importance of coming up with mechanisms for creating not just more education, but more exposure of Israeli Jews to Israeli Arabs, and obviously Israeli secular groups with Haredi. These divisions come through in a very pronounced way. And I think obviously if one is looking to try to minimize them, there needs to be not just more education, but more socialization of basic civic attitudes and responsibilities. And this is something that JPPI is doing, which I greatly applaud. So why don't I just stop there?
Thank you very much, Dennis. I would like now to hear JPPI's co-chair, Ambassador Stewart Isaacs' opinion on these findings. Stewart.
Thank you. Well, first, I want to thank Professor Fuchs and Shmuel and Noah for their work on this fascinating survey. I want to thank the William Davidson Foundation for their support of both the survey and more generally the whole Pluralism Project. It's really a central feature of what we do. And this emphasizes to me the distinctiveness of JPPI among all Israeli institutions, and that we face challenges on three perspectives. First, the Israeli government, US government perspective. Second, Israeli diaspora relations. And third, which this survey focuses on, internal challenges to the Jewish state. I'm struck by the degree to which the extent of religiosity and political orientation colors attitudes in every one of the factors that is studied, whether it's Jewish-Arab relations, internal Jewish issues, sharing public spaces, neighborhoods, friendships, and political partnerships. I likewise would have expected, as Dennis mentioned, that with the pandemic and the central role and the positive role that Israeli Arabs played as frontline workers, nurses, doctors, and other health providers, that one would have seen a more positive shift in terms of their role. The deep polarization that this survey indicates mirrors the deep polarization of Israeli society between Jews and Arabs and within the Jewish communities. And this is a challenge to the cohesion and strength of Israel, which Yedidia emphasizes, and is something to really be most concerned about. On the positive side, I was pleased to learn about the degree to which some 70% of Israelis feel a common bond and a common shared future with diaspora Jews. And interestingly, the finding that there is a greater sense of that among more conservative and right-wing than left-wing and secular Israelis. I'm also struck by the fact that if one had asked many of the same questions of Americans, the same degree of polarization would show. Our own left-right divisions are extremely sharp. The polarization is extremely deep. The mutual suspicions are evident every day in every way. Lack of communication of those who have different views has increased. We go to different neighborhoods. We have different friends. We watch different news. We get different sets of facts. We live in different worlds. And one wonders, therefore, if this is a function of democracy and a challenge to democracy. But again, I'm struck by how many of the findings in Israel one could transfer to views in the United States as well. And so perhaps Israel can be a model of creative ways to bridge differences. And one of the things that Yedidia has pioneered is a new project with the Israeli Education Department, which is still in the making, but is perhaps close to being a reality. It's really a sort of civics course. And one hopes that that kind of education, and I think Yedidia is hopeful of reaching 100,000 students, could be a model for what we do both in the United States and in the West in general to build bridges of understanding, but certainly within Israel, that perhaps if this can take hold, that this kind of polarization, which the survey indicates, will diminish somewhat. So thank you again to all those who participate and to the Davidson Foundation for funding this.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes for your questions. So if anybody wants to ask something. Stephen, I saw that you asked something in the chat.
No, I can start by Dennis asked a couple questions for which I have quick answers.
Okay.
Mostly thanks to Noah, who was so good. He was able to pull out some numbers and send me by WhatsApp as we were speaking. So Dennis, here's one answer to your question. Of right-wingers in Israel who don't want Arabs in the coalition, about 50% say that most Arabs are extremists. Right-wingers who do want Arabs in the coalition, only 11% of them say most Arabs are extremists. So everything you said about the connection, the clear connection between politics and the way Jews refer to Arab extremism or reasons for violence in the Arab street or wanting Arabs in the coalition, everything is mixed. The only thing I would take an issue with, you said, what about right-wingers who support the government, assuming there is such thing? I believe that the more this government survives, the more it becomes a fact that being right-wing in Israel is to oppose this government. So it's becoming very difficult to identify people who both self-define as right-wing and support the government. But the connection between politics and Jewish-Arab relations, image, etc., is clear-cut. There's no doubt about it.
Thank you very much, Muel, for your enlightening remarks. I see that Stephen has something to ask. You raised your hand. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. I have a question about the perception of the contributions of the Arab and Haredi sectors to Israeli society. And I'm just wondering what the comparison is of that perspective to the fact. And has there been an analysis of the gap between the perception and what the actual contribution may or may not be? Thank you.
Well, Rabbi, that depends on your definition of contribution. If contribution is to study Torah, then Haredis contribute to Israeli society more than most of us. If contribution is a financial contribution, then Haredis contribute to Israeli society less than most of us. One of the issues separating the mainstream secular traditional Israelis from the Haredi sector is that they disagree on what would it be that we define as a meaningful contribution to the state of Israel. Haredis, of course, believe that they contribute a lot to the well-being of Israel by strengthening its culture, its spiritual sphere, etc. For other Israelis who look more at economic factors, then their assessment of Haredi contribution is not outrageously out of line. It's true that Haredi Israelis, it's also true in a different way for Arab Israelis, but for Haredis, it's really clear. Participation in the workforce of ultra-Orthodox men is relatively low. The positions that they hold in different sectors is relatively low. The level of education, of secular education that enables people to hold positions in the high-tech sector, etc., they don't have such education among ultra-Orthodox. So again, when you look at economic factors, the assessment of other Israelis is not unrealistic, except for the fact that, again, contribution is a matter of what is contribution is a matter of ideas and ideology and not exactly fact.
Thank you very much. Any more questions or something to add to the conversation? Anyone, please? Okay, so I have to say that I personally feel now a little more hopeful than before. I hope that you too feel like me. So Thank you very much, you all. And good evening or good morning to you in the United States.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Toda.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.